It was just after 11 a.m. on a quiet Monday morning. Marianne Wilmont had barely left the community gardens when her fiancé, Jonathan Stasiuk, picked up a chainsaw. He wasn't weeding, he wasn't trimming trees. He was walking down a narrow dirt path towards 73-year-old Gerry White, a man who was his former employer, a fellow trustee, and a long-time source of resentment. John had been stewing for weeks. He told friends just the day before, "Tomorrow, I go to war." By the way, this is Dark Case, and you can call me Jack. I bring you rare and unseen true crime cases, as well as other things that you may later regret knowing, with multiple uploads every single week. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, then make sure you join the Dark Case family now by hitting subscribe and turning all notifications on. And now it's time for today's silly little question. If you had to pick one everyday object to defend yourself in a zombie apocalypse, and it must be something that isn't already a weapon, what would it be and why? All of your support on Patreon and via channel memberships are so appreciated, and I can't thank you enough. However, thank you. But now, on with the video. Jonathan Stasiuk and Gerry White had known each other for years. White was a well-known figure on the Isle of Wight. He was a conservative councillor, a respected publican, and later in life a man dedicated to community service. He ran 2 pubs in Sandown, and he'd employed John as a chef in both of them. By all accounts, Gerry was generous. He was encouraging. He was a man that believed in second chances, and he often extended a hand to people who needed direction, and John was one of those men. Over time, their professional relationship evolved. Both men would become involved with a local volunteer project, Lake Community Gardens. This was a 16-acre plot, meant to serve as a therapeutic farm, a place to help vulnerable people grow food and to find purpose. John was trusted enough to become a trustee, where he would work alongside Gerry. But things didn't stay civil for too long. Behind the scenes, frictions began to grow. John claimed that Gerry used the garden merely as a dumping ground for pub waste, and there was a total of £3,025 between 2 different transactions that caused a major issue, but I'll talk more about that in a moment. John didn't just hold a grudge, he let it grow and fester, and privately he began speaking in disturbing terms. He began making threats. He hinted that violence may be the answer, but it seems nobody believed that he would actually do anything. To anyone on the outside, the tensions between John and Gerry did look kind of petty. At most, a clash of egos between 2 men with very different personalities. But to John, it was very personal. He believed that Gerry had bullied his partner, Marianne. He believed he was being disrespected, undermined, and dismissed. This was both in public and behind closed doors. And worst of all to John, he believed he was being cheated. At the heart of this feud was money. There was a £3,000 donation from the local Rotary Club, which is a charity, and that money was intended for roof repairs at the garden. John was convinced that Gerry had claimed the full amount, even though the actual work, he said, only cost around £1,300. And then there was a £25 argument. That small sum, allegedly owed to Marianne for petrol, became a symbol in Jonathan's mind of everything that Gerry stood for, that being manipulation, arrogance, and dishonesty. And every minor issue that would come up, from damp firewood deliveries to plants being dumped near the sheds, added fuel to this fire. John kept tally. He started building a case in his mind, and in his head, Gerry wasn't just a difficult colleague, he was now a thief, a liar, and a threat. Jonathan's paranoia spiraled. He described feeling targeted at meetings. He believed decisions were being made behind his back. And eventually, he claimed that the entire community garden was being used simply as a front for Gerry's personal gain. Whether any of this was actually true didn't seem to matter anymore. By late May, John wasn't looking for compromise. He wasn't hoping for a resolution. He was just waiting for a chance. And that chance arrived on Bank Holiday Monday, the 27th of May, 2024. John and Marianne had spent the weekend camping out at the gardens. Marianne had just left to head home, and Jonathan, he stayed behind, and he had a plan. According to Marianne, there was no warning signs. She said Jonathan had been completely normal that morning. In fact, she could even describe him as relaxed. They'd been gardening together, they'd been walking the dogs, and enjoying the sunshine out in the wilderness. However, Marianne had no idea that just hours earlier, John had messaged his friends with a chilling phrase, "Tomorrow, I go to war." Gerry arrived alone and late that morning. John saw him from a distance, and he just decided to seize his moment. He entered the garden's clubhouse. Inside was a chainsaw, something that was kept on site for maintenance work. He took it, fueled it up, and started it. He then followed Gerry down a woodland path near the lake. In Jonathan's words, it felt like a movie. He claimed to be watching himself from the outside, but his action suggests he was anything but detached. He revved the chainsaw and struck Gerry from behind. He was swinging into his legs. Gerry fell to the ground. He pleaded John to stop, but the attack continued. When the chainsaw cut out and could no longer be restarted, you'd think that this may be the end of the attack, but instead, John turned to his bare hands. He now throttled Gerry and then smothered him. Witnesses would later recall hearing John scream, "Die, bastard, die," and then there was silence. John decided not to run. He sat there for a while, he had a drink and collected his thoughts. He then picked up his phone and dialed 999. He told the operator, "I've just murdered someone." When the operator asked if Gerry needed an ambulance, John's reply was chilling. "I'm going to make sure he doesn't." Police arrived just minutes later and found Gerry in the bushes. His time on this earth had come to an end. John Stasiuk didn't resist. He didn't flee or lie or try to hide what he'd done. In fact, he seemed weirdly proud. When officers arrived, he led them directly to the scene. And even faced with what he'd done, John showed no emotion. As police cuffed him and walked him back to their van, John glanced back and said, "I hope the bastard is dead." This is the full available body cam footage from the arrest, and it's almost impossible to imagine what John had just done. The whole thing is eerie. It's not too long, and it's definitely worth watching.
You John Stasiuk? Stasiuk. Okay.
No,
did you Stasiuk? I'm sorry. Did you say you're confused, John?
No.
Okay.
No, you were confused.
Well, yeah, we were. We weren't sure which direction.
I'm not fucking confused.
What's John, based on the call you've made to us, before we go any further, I need to arrest you on suspicion of murder. Okay. So you don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you don't mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court, and anything you do say may be given in evidence. Do you understand what I've just said? Okay, and the reason for your arrest, obviously, is for a prompt and effective investigation, and to prevent further harm to anybody.
Yep.
If you can show us where the gentleman is, does he need medical attention?
Don't think so.
Okay. Where are we going? Okay. All right, let's just double lock those. Okay.
That's a bit harsh.
So I just need to make sure double locks.
They tighten if you don't double lock them. We don't want to hurt you, mate.
Because you're handcuffed, I don't
Okay.
want to fall over.
Okay, that's fine.
And whereabouts are we looking, sir?
We're going in here.
Yep. Any dogs in or anything? No.
It's just opening it.
Push it.
Push.
Where are we looking at?
Keep going.
How far down then?
100 metres.
100 metres.
Yep.
Are we just following this? Should we keep John here, do you think?
Yeah, we're going to stay here then.
Yeah,
It's
keep
100
going.
metres straight, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Back at the police station, John gave a full account across 6 separate interviews. He told police that the attack was deliberate, that he picked up the chainsaw to give himself the edge, in a confrontation that he had long fantasized about. He described the chainsaw as the most formidable item available. He acknowledged that he did want to finish the job. Jonathan said that he was glad Gerry was gone, and he would repeat this time after time, showing that there was no remorse. Detectives said that the only moment of hesitation came when they asked him why. He offered vague explanations, misunderstandings, disrespect, and petty grievances. He of course mentioned the £3,000 donation and the £25 petrol debt. But to the normal person, none of this added up to murder. This was personal and festering, and somehow it had finally erupted into this horrific event. The man they arrested was calm, articulate, and chillingly detached. One officer later said it felt like interviewing someone describing a dream, not a real-life murderer. At trial, Jonathan tried a different approach. He denied murder, and instead he pleaded guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. The defense presented new psychiatric evaluations. One expert diagnosed John with autism spectrum disorder, and another suggested that he had autistic traits, but he didn't meet the full criteria. Jonathan himself told the court that hearing a diagnosis helped him to make sense of what had happened. He claimed the attack felt like he wasn't in control, and compared the scene to being in a movie. He talked about watching himself from the outside and acting without fully choosing to act. However, would the judge and jury be convinced? Midway through the trial, just before closing arguments, John abruptly changed his plea to guilty of murder. When asked why, he said he had misjudged the situation and now saw how callous his actions had been. However, his remorse would come far too late for the court and far too late for Gerry White's family. The murder left a hole in the heart of the community. Gerry had been more than a counsellor or a landlord. He was a mentor, a father, a grandfather, and a trusted friend. His widow, Lee, said the pain of knowing how he passed was unbearable. His son Desmond called it the bitterest irony that his father had been taken by someone he had once employed and helped. And yet, even as the court reeled from the brutality of the crime, Marianne stood by her fiancé. She publicly forgave John. She said she still wanted to marry him. And whilst this means that she faces abuse in the street, including assault, she told reporters she believed John would never hurt her and never do anything like this again. Her loyalty only deepened the community's confusion and grief, because while justice was being served, the scars were only just beginning to show. In his closing remarks, the judge didn't hold back. He described the chainsaw as an especially vicious weapon and said Jonathan had brought it that day, intending to remove Gerry White's legs, and he was so determined that when the machine cut out, he instead moved on to manual methods. The judge acknowledged the autism diagnosis but made clear, saying, "You obsessed over perceived, although relatively trivial, grievances, and to such an extent that you allowed them to build into a form of hatred. Nothing, no check dispute, no garden squabble, no petrol money justified what happened on that day. And behind every chilling detail revealed in court was the reality of a stolen life." Lee White, in a powerful victim impact statement, said, "Losing my husband under such horrific and unbelievable circumstances has led to major shock and anxiety. Knowing what he went through is hard to bear. Life has changed and cannot be normal again. I have underlying sadness for Gerry, but also fury and anger too." Desmond White added, "Dad was too generous and accommodating to the wrong people. People often took advantage of him." Jonathan Stasiuk now serves his sentence behind bars. The garden he once claimed to care for does remain, and so does the silence he left in his wake. In November, Judge Christopher Parker Casey delivered the final word. He sentenced Jonathan Christopher Stasiuk to life in prison with a minimum term of 25 years before parole can even be considered. Be careful out there, and I'll see you soon.